Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Elspeth Revere. I'm Vice President for Media, Culture, and Special Initiatives at the MacArthur Foundation. And I'm just delighted to see you all here. Those of you I can see, the lights are a little bit bright. But I did look around before I came in, and I saw many friends in the audience. And we are really heartened that so many of you, an overflow crowd, in fact, are interested in the role of arts in creating and sustaining vital communities here in Chicago. It is my particular pleasure to host a conversation today with Rocco Landesman, Chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, and Shelley Potisha, Senior Advisor at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and four Chicago leaders, some of them nationally known, to talk about the important role the arts and culture play in the development of a healthy, thriving region. I'm really excited about this event, which combines two topics, the arts and healthy communities and regions, that I personally care a lot about, having started my life as an urban planner. But it is also a set of topics that the MacArthur Foundation has enthusiastically supported over most of its history. The MacArthur Foundation supports work in over 60 countries around the world and makes over $230 million in grants each year in the United States and internationally. But no place is more important to us than Chicago. It is our headquarters and our home. Over the past 30 years, MacArthur has invested nearly $800 million in this city. Much of that investment is in community and economic development, where, over the years, we've supported work to make our neediest neighborhoods stronger, to strengthen affordable housing, and to bring the best thinking developed in Chicago to the nation, and vice versa. And we have always supported the arts in Chicago. Chicago's arts community has it all: institutions of international renown, world-class orchestras, art collections, opera and dance, a deep and vibrant theater scene, brave experimental work, and a rich array of ethnic and neighborhood groups. MacArthur is proud to support more than 200 cultural organizations with $8 million each year. This vibrant community is led, nurtured, and sustained by all of you who lead and work in arts organizations, teach arts in schools and communities, provide funding as individuals and through your organizations, buy tickets and attend arts events, facilitate public funding for the arts at every level of government, bring your business investments to Chicago, and help needy communities enrich themselves through the arts. I see you in the audience, or at least I did before I stepped out here in front of the lights. You are our colleagues and partners in MacArthur's work, and I welcome you today. And it is a particular honor today to welcome Chicago's Mayor-elect, Rahm Emanuel, who has taken time from his busy schedule to be here. His presence is a sign of his commitment to the vital arts and cultural community in Chicago and his understanding about the important role the arts play to make sure that our region maintains its reputation as a place where the arts are valued, supported, and flourishing. We could not have organized today's events without the time and thoughtful contributions of our partners, Arts Alliance Illinois, and the Goodman Theater. In particular, I'd like to thank Rod Joy and his excellent staff at the Arts Alliance, and Rock Schulfer and his staff at the Goodman, especially Mark Cozy. We're not used to having such a professional staff arrange our events, and I really could appreciate the work that went into it. Thanks to Goodman's generosity, we're grateful to be able to come together here in the beautiful Owen Theater with the set of El Nogalar. At the federal level, we've had the privilege to work with the National Endowment for the Arts and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We thank Rocco Landesman and his staff, particularly Anita Decker, and HUD Deputy Secretary Sims and his staff, particularly Dan Lurie, and all those who did so much to ensure the success of this event. Deputy Secretary Sims was unable to join us today due to obligations in Washington, so Shelley Potisha, a senior advisor, has graciously agreed to speak in his place. Thank you, Ms. Potisha. And I want to personally extend my deepest gratitude to my colleague Deepa Gupta, Arts and Culture Program Officer at MacArthur, who organized this event, providing both the good ideas and the attention to all the details that go into making an event like this successful. So please join me in thanking everyone. In addition to the mayor-elect, I'm pleased to welcome several other elected officials today, including Congressman Danny Davis, representatives from the offices of Senator Dick Durbin and Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, several aldermen and aldermen-elect, including Willie Cochran, Ray Colon, Vi Daly, Shirley Newsom, Tom Tunney, Scott Wagspack, Marianne Smith, Harry Osterman, and Michelle Smith. We also welcome Mayor Michael Belsky of Highland Park and Mayor Valerie Bird of Yorkville. Thank you all for coming and for your support of the arts. And finally, just 2 program notes. This event is being audio taped and will be broadcast on Chicago Public Radio's Chicago Amplified series. It is also being videotaped for airing on CAN TV. We thank both organizations for being here with us today. And please stay after the program for the reception that follows in the lobby where you entered. Meet each other and talk to the speakers and staff. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Chicago's Mayor-elect, Mr. Rahm Emanuel, who has just a few minutes to speak and will then take a few questions afterwards. Mr. Emanuel?
Thank you. Thank you. I will just say, given all the aldermen you just mentioned, that counts as a quorum. It's now an open meeting here in City Council. If there's a gavel, I hope that's not an editorial of the platform coming down. It's good to see so many people here on what I think is a very, very important subject. I say this, one, as a former dancer, somebody also who's married to not only a great woman, but also as a person who has a master's in art history from the University of Chicago, who, when we first met on a blind date, was actually at the Art Institute. She actually has a master's in art history, in medieval art history. When we were living in Washington under President Clinton's administration, she was going to get an executive MBA degree at Wharton. And for the first 6 months, she's going to kill me when I tell this story with all that over there. But, you know, this is one of many reasons for her to kill me. For the first 6 months of her MBA program, she kept spelling the word prophet, P-R-O-P-H-E-T. And I just said, I don't think we're getting our money's worth out of this MBA. Just a gut instinct, honey. But it does tell you the background of the education she got in art history. And it stuck with her years later. So let me start, while the subject is obviously about the importance of arts and culture in economic development. I want to make a couple points, because before you get to economic development, it is my belief, and I don't think I'm preaching to the choir, I hope. The first importance of arts is how it enriches the soul. There is no doubt there's the economic value to a city, an entire city. But that starts from a foundation of what it does to the quality of life of a neighborhood, a city, and the individual it touches. I just, the other night, came here to a great play the night before it closed, Gods of Carnage, recommended by a great critic, my parents. And I mean, when it comes to parents, critic of their son. That they had recommended the play, had seen it. And I feel like ever since the campaign was over, that was for like 4 or 5 months of being literally in the cultural wasteland, and I finally kind of busted out, and I got to see A Twist of Rain. I got to see, as I said, the play here. I got to see 3 or 4 different David Gray across the street at the theater. Great musical act, some music. When I had a free 20 minutes, I stopped over to the Museum of Art to the New Wing to see a great photography exhibit. So I want you to know I'm hard on this transition, working very hard. No, but this is all by way of saying it's how important it is in the sense of what it can do for the quality of life. That is fundamentally to the individual who both creates and the individual who experiences. So before you talk about economic development, I don't want to lower the value or demean the value of what really the artist is doing. So I want to say that by way before I talk about the other piece of the arts and culture to a city. Second is on the core subject here, which is the economic development, economic value and development that comes from art and culture. I mean, we have two, if not, there's multiple, but two clear examples, in my view, of the importance of arts and culture to the economic development of a city. I see it in my own neighborhood, where the Old Town School of Folk Music on Lincoln Avenue. That was not, 10, 15, 20 years ago, pre that space being converted, and then now they're converting across the street. Pre that space, that was not an area that was vibrant. Today, because of one cultural institution, an entire neighborhood is different. And not just that street, but literally expanding outside and building away from, out of the center core energy of the Old Town School of Folk Music. And when I was a congressman, we used to, every year, meet with the Old Town School of Folk Music before they would do their summer festival and work on all the visas for the artists and musicians that were coming from around the world to come here to perform at Wells Park. And you can see in a neighborhood, literally a transformation with one institution, this being music, turn an entire neighborhood with restaurants, a nightlife that pre that institution did not exist. And that's a way to bring economic development and arts together to work for an entire neighborhood. And not just that neighborhood, but an entire city that can come to that neighborhood to participate and experience it. And it not only is for performance, but my kids also enrolled in different either dance or music pieces there. I have sat on many a floor with my children during those dance pieces. Second is, it's exciting that we recruited the Boeing Corporation to come to Chicago. But if anybody knows the history, one of the tipping points for Boeing was that the CEO, Phil Condit at the time, was a lover of opera. And he knew that Chicago had a great lyric opera. Now, it wasn't the reason. It's just when the scales were done, it just was one extra ounce on that scale that threw Chicago it made Chicago a stronger choice for Boeing as they were relocating. It wasn't the reason. It wasn't, obviously no board's going to vote it because the CEO likes the lyric opera in that city, especially for a company that builds planes, because there's a corporate jet then, if you really wanted it. You could fly here from wherever you are. But it was actually helped us recruit a company that has added employees. That is like the second one. I'm really getting worried at this point. I'm going to speak up this way, okay? I just hope it's when I answer questions that doesn't come hurling down at a faster pace. So all those are examples. Those are two examples of ways that literally a city and our neighborhoods can grow economically, where arts and culture can be the engine of economic growth. Now, I will say one thing also in the transition. We have, and when I mean transition, the transition from campaign, mayor-elect, into obviously what's coming on May 16th. And that is, as I saw the play here, and I'm using this as an analogy, I saw a great play at a great theater here, downtown in the theater district. I saw a play at a theater in the neighborhoods, Twist a Ring. Too often our debates are about institutions versus neighborhood. This is not a limited pie. And if I do one thing, and I hope to engage in this discussion, and I hope I'm right, but I may not, I hope I get challenged on this, we should not see this debate as if downtown or big theater versus neighborhood. It is not a limited pie. Let us grow that pie so we're not in this race against zero-sum game. That's true. I mean, I was a little surprised when I talked about maybe an uptown music district, modeled after the downtown theater district. That was not to say anything about, as somebody the other night who saw a great group over at the Double Door. That's not to say that what happens in our local clubs, that if you had an uptown music area, it was somehow at their expense. If anything, I want it to be synergistic that you have a great venue scene. I happen to think the Riviera, the Aragon, where I have seen great music, Lucinda Williams, David Gray originally, back at the Riviera, and I saw what everybody does when they want to break the fast on Yom Kippur, the Rolling Stones at the Aragon. Doesn't everybody do that? Thank God I don't go to an Orthodox synagogue. That is a great place, but it doesn't mean you cheat audiences from our other parts of our club scene. The Green Mill happens to be there. It means you're creating an audience for all our arts. So I want us as a city, specifically as you all are leaders in this space, you wouldn't be here otherwise, to not think of what we do as if somehow we're doing something to help. In this case, I'll use it more as an example than a specific. If somehow something happens for Goodman, that comes at the expense of our neighborhood theaters. No, it's about building an audience to appreciate theater. And if we did something in the music, I say this, and I'm going to be a big advocate for our Dance Festival International. I want to grow that. I think you know why. My own self-interest, but Chicago is a great, great destination for dance. We finally have spaces for great dance to be seen. And that means if we're building an audience, I just saw the other night Gus Giordano. His daughter has a beautiful piece, Tal, incredibly gorgeous piece, that she just recently choreographed. And that means that as we build an audience for dance, we're not building it for one company or another. We're building it so a city's life and its vibrancy and its heartbeat is growing, and we as a city have other people participate. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll take questions, is art has to touch every part of our city. It's not just for those who can afford it. Because if it is a form that speaks to, in a way to all of us, it has to be accessible to all of us. And all of us have a challenge to make sure we make, by building a community, we invite people in, not exclude them. And I know I'm speaking to people who love art, and I know that you share that mission. With that, I want to thank you for all being here, participating in something that I think is important for our city's future, and I'm optimistic about it. With that, I'll take some questions.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's panel, Steve Edwards. Steve is Content Director at 91.5 WBEZ, Chicago Public Radio, and you most likely know him from his time as host of 848. He is an award-winning journalist and interviewer, and we're very glad to have him here with us today, and he will introduce his panel and take us through the rest of the afternoon. Thank you, Steve.
Elspeth, thank you very much. It's an honor and a delight to be with all of you for what we hope will be a fascinating, exciting conversation, and we hope that all of you will be as interested in participating as you were with Mayor-elect as well. So we'll actually open this up to questions as we move on. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have a conversation first that will involve a perspective on arts and communities from the national level, and we have two eminent guests to give us that federal perspective and how they're thinking about this in different ways. And then we'll also turn to four fascinating individuals who are working in various ways, in various mediums and in various communities to actually put exciting projects into play here in Chicago. I want to introduce from my far right, your left, I want to introduce Shelley Potisha, who is with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And next to Shelley is Rocco Landesman, who's the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. Please give them a warm welcome, if you will. And Shelley is the senior advisor for a program known as the Sustainable Communities Partnership. And I want to come back and talk to you about the way in which that project is conceived and how different agencies are working to make some things happen that are different. But Rocco, let me start with you. You have made a major point to put this notion of placemaking, creative placemaking, into play in cities around the nation and communities all over the nation. What do you mean by that notion of cultural and creative placemaking?
Well, we think there's an important intersection between the arts and what I would call the real world, communities. neighborhoods, that their arts have a role in economic development, quality of life for a place. And we have a lot of data, a lot of research that shows that when you bring art and artists into a place, into a community, it transforms that place. That where there is a cultural presence, you have demonstrably higher levels of social cohesion. People who are engaged in the arts tend to vote in larger numbers to join other organizations. It's a powerful force for civic cohesion. You have it has a big effect on child welfare. There are much lower levels of truancy, juvenile delinquency, and of course it's an economic driver. So when you're talking about changing a place, particularly in these economic times, we think the arts have to be a part of that conversation. And what's exciting to me is that conversation regarding the arts has been engaged by a number of the federal agencies, most notably and first and foremost, HUD.
All right, so Shelley, give us this piece from HUD's perspective. Why is HUD involved in conversations that connect to the arts and culture in this country?
Well, Sean Donovan, the Secretary of HUD, is trained as an architect. He was a housing commissioner for New York City. He's very much an urbanite and understands that we can't just be investing in an individual housing project to make change in the way that people live their lives and their outcomes, but we have to think about the comprehensive nature of communities. And in place after place that we have been working, the importance of arts and entrepreneurial spirit has really become the key to the turnaround that we know needs to happen in many more places.
Okay, that sounds great on its surface. Both things that you each have said make perfect sense. But what does that mean in practice, you know, when you actually get down to the ground? What's an example of a project where this is playing out?
Well, we've done some projects together. We've also done projects individually that have involved the arts. I attended an event in Baltimore where HUD was building artist housing. And that was going to be the anchor for the transformation of a neighborhood. And I remember saying to the mayor of Baltimore when I was there with Sean, I said, "Are you worried about as you get artist housing and maybe some galleries springing up and maybe you put in a theater or whatever, and are you worried about gentrification?" And he said, "Please God, if we could have any tax base here." And there are so many places where we see this developing. I was recently in Cincinnati, and there's I think it's called Across the Rhine neighborhood or whatever it is, whatever the exact name is, a place where nobody would go. There were crack addicts and prostitutes and mostly police actions in the neighborhood. Well, they put a theater there. And shortly after that, there was a couple of galleries. And then you had housing, artist housing. And now it's a place where people bring their dates and walk around the streets. And there's vitality. And of course, our partnership with HUD has been transforming for us because of the size of the scale in which they can do things. Ron Sims and I were recently in Miami, where HUD had made about a $4.5 million grant to the South Florida Cultural District there. Well, we wouldn't make a $4.5 million grant in our dreams at the NEA, but this is a way to get significant resources into the field for art and for artists, and it's transformative of neighborhoods and communities.
And Shelley, it's not just the NEA. I mean, as it relates to HUD, there's the Department of Transportation, there's
Right.
EPA. So
Yeah.
How is all of this coming together as a piece from the government's perspective?
Well, I think that one thing that perhaps isn't well understood is that our funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development is actually enormously flexible. It's one of the few sets of funds that go directly to communities that can be used for a whole array of things, housing and infrastructure, parks, community
So
services.
not just bricks and mortar
It's just
dwellings.
No. And what we have said is we're putting the community development role back into play at HUD, that it's not just, you know, a housing agency, but it's about community development. And in order to be a community development agency, we have to be more comprehensive in the way that we work with communities. So part of the way that we have done that is through partnerships with other federal agencies. And I think that's one really signature difference with this administration, is that we are not about the hardened silos of housing, transportation, arts, environment, but we are about true placemaking. And that everybody who works locally in communities knows that these issues are all interconnected. The example that Rocco gave about, literacy rates and safety in communities and the thriving economics of a neighborhood, you can't solve that with, transportation going over here or a brownfield cleanup going someplace else. We need to be aligned and leveraged. And so we formed this Sustainable Communities Partnership, and we are actively working to find ways in which we can just constantly align everything that we're doing.
The whole notion of sustainable communities or choice neighborhoods, the concept is that by working together and across the lines, you can do a lot more. That a community doesn't consist just of housing any more than education consists of just the teachers.
Right.
It has to do with education, with healthcare, with transportation, with the environment. And the thrilling thing about this administration is the work that's being done across those lines. And of course, we believe that the arts have a role in that. I'm going in a couple of days to New Orleans, where my friend Mitch Landrieu has had the arts portfolio at the state level before, but really gets the importance of arts in neighborhoods. And what I've asked Mitch to do is, I said, using the arts as a fulcrum, find asks for all the federal agencies where you can go, and each one of them has a relationship to the arts. I mean, Ray LaHood at the Department of Transportation understands that road building is not just about, that transportation is not just about road building and engineering, it's about quality of life. But and the arts have a role in that.
But how is, say, just to be specific here, how is the Department of Transportation going to vet someone who wants to incorporate arts and culture into a particular proposal?
Okay, so, well, this is sort of a little fun thing that we've been doing at the federal level that is not very Washington-like, which is when we're just all joining hands. So, for example,
and singing Kumbaya?
We're kind of hanging. We're hanging. And so HUD has had 2 grant programs this last year, and we gave grants to this region, a Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant and a Community Challenge Grant. We had 8 federal agencies together reviewing the grant applications. We brought in representatives from 14 foundations, philanthropic entities, to be part of those teams. We just mixed it all up with the idea that we need each other's expertise. So, for example, I was on the team for a variety of different transportation projects this last year, and being able to say, that road that they're proposing, it kind of just wipes out this whole neighborhood. Are you sure this should be a priority here? It might be designed okay, but what's going to happen to the people? Or this isn't addressing the
jobs housing mismatch or all of those kinds of things.
So in some ways, that's, we're just functioning very differently.
But there are 2 things. Go ahead if you want to.
Well, just to pile on to that, in my hometown of St. Louis, the Department of Transportation just made a $26 million grant for light rail that's going to connect the cultural district along Delmar Boulevard with the Art Museum in Forest Park and the zoo, which is going to create a cultural quilt, a fabric in the community that didn't exist before. And that's a place where transportation can intersect with the arts. And there's 100 examples of that going on through the federal government.
2 quick questions I want to get in before we actually involve the rest of our panelists here. The first is, one of the stereotypes about artistic neighborhoods or enclaves, especially in large urban areas, that they often happen organically. You know, it's one or two people, it's a community of folks sort of doing it themselves, sort of in the wake of all sorts of other problems and in spite of all sorts of other barriers. And it's really sort of done outside of government intervention, government policy, government aid, as the case may be, grants and such. So what specifically can, and what role specifically can the federal government play in actually accelerating those kinds of things or creating the space for others to step into a space they might not have considered?
Well, there are probably a zillion different ways. I mean, one example is that our grants are now going to help local governments and nonprofits purchase property and assemble them so that they could be for the kind of artist housing or whatever kind of housing and development a local community would want. I was visiting Salt Lake City. They use our formula funds to create a micro-lending program for local businesses and artists. And it just has thrived over the last...
HUD funds.
HUD funds. Yeah. People, that's what I'm saying. Often people don't know there are many, 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 many different ways that if we can help communities understand that flexibility, understand what some of the creative ideas are that are being used around the country, we can then, you know, help scale up those ideas in ways that work for local communities. I mean, I think that one of the things that we have been acutely sensitive to is that some of the old ways were too top-down, bureaucratic, one-size-fits-all.
We're going to do this same program in 50 municipalities
everywhere, and it's all
everybody's.
We're just going to assume everybody's the same. Well, people aren't the same. Communities are not the same. And even within a community, there are lots of different conditions. So a part of what this administration is doing is really reframing our relationship with communities so that we can be more in the role of problem solvers, helping to figure out how our funding can be used to target toward the kinds of things that you'd like to do.
That's so important. The concept is that it's place-based. It starts with the place. It doesn't start with some concept on high. It's the particular place and what does it need. And it doesn't stop with the federal government. It's not, you know, these partnerships across the federal government are thrilling, but if 1 and 1 is going to equal 6, you also need a powerful engagement by the private sector. And we've started to engage important conversations with the major arts funders in this country to find out how they can work alongside the NEA, alongside other federal agencies in particular places so that 1 and 1 does equal 6 eventually. There's a real multiplier effect, and that's critically important.
And very quickly, we have a number of people represented in this audience from very different perspectives, elected officials, leaders of cultural institutions, nonprofits, smaller neighborhood-based arts organizations, and so forth. What advice do you give to those in this room here about how they can think about activating and even getting access to some of the dollars and program initiatives you've put forth?
Well, one of my pieces of advice is to really get engaged. With the coalitions that are focusing on working with our partnership. We gave a grant to CMAP, and that represents a coalition that is incredibly diverse, public, private, cities, counties, you name it. And this is really an opportunity to take the federal government's funding that is extremely flexible and pile on in order to be able to achieve some of the goals that you have for your community. And it only happens if we kind of break out of our standard roles and link arms with people who we may not have always worked with.
We'll come back to pick up on some of those points and obviously get some questions from some of you, but let me bring the other four into the conversation. Jeannie Gang is the principal of Studio Gang. She's an architect known locally and internationally. Next to Jeannie is Lindsay Gaskins, who's the founder and CEO of Marbles, the Brain Store, Chicago-based retail startup which grew out of Sandbox Industries, a local business incubator.
Next to Lindsay is Theaster Gates, who is an artist, musician, and cultural planner. He's also a director of arts program development for the University of Chicago. And finally, Jaime De Leon, who is the new communities program director for Enlace, a nonprofit community organization based in Little Village. There's so much to pick up on, about 16 different ways I think we could go with all of this. Let me start actually with you, Theaster, though, because you're working on a number of projects that seem to come right at the heart of what these guys are talking about here.
Sure.
I think about, in particular, the Dorchester Project. And for those who don't know about the Dorchester Project, or even what you're doing with the CHA, help us understand how you're thinking about these things.
Sure. I think for the 5 years that I lived in this neighborhood in Greater Grand Crossing, just down from Hyde Park, I had just kind of bumped my head a lot on where are the cultural resources for artists, where are the fiscal, administrative resources that artists could tap into to expand their careers, have space where they need to work. And at the same time that I was asking these questions of where are the resources and how could I access them as an individual artist, there was also the fact that I was I was living in a community that had major need. And so I wasn't able to get the kind of support that I wanted from the philanthropic community because I was an individual doing individual work and not a not-for-profit. And that everything, the resources that are available in major cities or major resources are available to not-for-profits. And the assumption is that good stewardship would happen. And in Chicago, I think not-for-profits do a good job. But sometimes the machine is too slow for the pace that I want to move at, or a board won't agree to buying 12 abandoned buildings. And so I found that I had to create models for myself that would allow smart redevelopment and smart cultural action. And it just meant taking advantage of existing housing stock that was in Greater Grand Crossing from changes in Section 8 housing opportunities and changes in the market, that I found myself feeling like I was half some kind of renegade developer and half a kind of artist activist, artist advocate, with my own needs mixed up in there. And so
so you didn't set out to necessarily do this, you just found yourself moving in that
direction.
Yeah,
that I was just tired of asking, you know, that I think artists, you know, and what happens—
How many people can relate to being tired of asking?
that I think artists are in this, I think that there are so many different kinds of artists, and I want to say this first, that there are some artists who are just interested in painting, and they paint, and it's awesome, you know, but there are other artists who come to the table with other sets of skills that actually could tap into these systems of renewal and redevelopment. I feel like Chicago has had the problem of being very developer sensitive. That if a big developer wants to do something, hideous or not, that the developer has the machine by which they could connect to the city's big machine and take advantage of a historic tax credit of that. In my case, I thought, well, what can I do? And it meant the acquisition of abandoned buildings at a very low rate, and then the creative rehab of those buildings. And instead of using those buildings as apartment rental units, which most folk who are interested in rehabbing that, is there a greater use for the building? And so I think Dorchester Projects is asking this question: what happens if a black middle-class dude stayed in a poor place and leveraged the resources that are around him in the city to have impact on that place? And it meant that there were lots of people who were interested in, you know, not only helping to plant a garden, but also to help with the acquisition or the renovation of buildings.
And it started with 1, and then 2, and then 3, and
yeah.
You told me previously, it's not just about the building, it's about what's happening inside
the space.
space.
That I think that part of the challenge, part of the challenge that developers have is that their primary concern in their business is about buildings. But I've seen a lot of buildings get built with empty commercial spaces in them because a developer isn't necessarily a good steward of the program that'll occupy the space. I just happen to really believe both in spaces and in the program. And so I think that there are other folk who are really good at programming spaces and thinking about how buildings could be creatively reused. But after these small projects, I saw that my alderman was trying to figure out kind of what of this neighborhood, what of some of the challenges, and there were 36 Chicago Housing Authority units that I had anxiety around being destroyed, that I thought they might get flattened. And so I called up a friend, Catherine Baker, who's an architect. Catherine, can we just dream about this? And pretty quickly I realized that this is it could remain a pipe dream if an artist thinks that an artist can take on 36 units by himself. But to the extent that there are mechanisms by which we could engage the development community and the philanthropic community to help us think about those things together, there might be ways. So I engaged Catherine Baker, who connected me with a developer who specializes in affordable housing, and we were able to convince the housing authority that this could be an intentional artist community. So it went from a very modest set of projects to an adjacent set of properties that would allow me to scale up my ambition, but also allow the mechanisms of new market tax credits and resources that HUD has available to do something really cool.
If memory serves, you have about 36 units
There are 36
here.
units.
15 are...
Will be low-income Chicago Housing Authority for tenants of Chicago Housing Authorities with interest in the arts.
Okay.
Another 15 would be for affordable housing for artists, and then 6 would get kind of retrofitted to be a shared space where those communities could come together.
And there was something you said just a second ago that made me think of you, Jeannie. And we should point out, the two of you are collaborating on a project I want to talk to you about at MoMA, and you're also engaged with each other at Harvard currently. But this notion of developers not always being good stewards of the purpose of the project and so forth, backing up even from the developer, you as an architect take a very interesting approach to your work. You're not just thinking about how's this thing going to be used, but what's the environment in which it lives and how does it actually connect with everything else. So what's your process for thinking about your work creatively?
Our work has been focused on, with relation to the arts, sometimes doing projects that are for arts organizations, like theaters, or we did a media production center for Columbia College, which is an art school here. But also with communities, so like working with communities to make a place really vibrant, and also with environment. So we kind of take all those three things. And so in addition to collaborating with the Astor on this project for MoMA, which is going to be about the suburbs and redefining the suburbs, we also work with people like Jim Lasko from Red Moon Theater, where we're thinking of how to create actually a barrier in the Chicago River against invasive species down near Bubbly Creek. So these are types of projects that they don't fall under just the big A architecture, but they're maybe pieces of infrastructure or...
Oh, you got to tell me more about this, this barrier. I mean, here we are, it's Asian carp mania, and what's an architect and a guy who leads a theater company known for amazing spectacle puppetry doing as the last line of defense against some environmental scourge.
Oh, I know. We started getting involved with the idea of it within Natural Resource Defense Council, who emphasized the need to do a physical barrier as opposed to poisoning the river or putting electric barriers in there, and so I gathered up Jim and some engineering professionals to think about it's not only a barrier, but it could also be a bridge, and it could also be many other things. How could this little piece of infrastructure have a bigger impact on the two neighborhoods, Bridgeport and Pilsen, than just being a barrier in the river? So it's one of those projects that crosses all these different boundaries. Yeah. And Red Moon, Jim sees the potential spectacle and the importance of the place, for telling a story. And so that's how
in and around and on that bridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it is the story of dividing the waters that once flowed into the lake and now are flowing out the other direction. And if we put this barrier there, it's kind of like reclaiming that spot as the dividing point. So it's kind of, it has a symbolic importance, and that's where I thought of Red Moon, you know, with the ability to tell a story to the public and make them understand it. It's a very complicated engineering story, but how can we, you know, mix these things together?
Lindsay, I want to get you in on this conversation. Rocco alluded to the private sector.
Sure.
And you come out of, you know, Boston Consulting background, the Sandbox Industries incubator idea, and you've launched, you know, together with others, this retail concept using creativity and gaming and puzzles to,
Sure.
you know, engage people's minds, to sell products certainly, but also to create something beyond just that. How do you think about the role in which arts and creativity actually connects with the work that you do as a business person?
Sure. So I kind of feel like an outsider a little bit on the profit side, you know, thinking about that all the time. But I think what we're doing with Marbles is really taking design and attaching it to a category that didn't have design before. If you haven't seen the store, it has a lot of design elements. The architect was very important to the business concept. And what we're finding is customers appreciate that. And we're able to outperform other game stores, toy stores out there, because not only are we doing something novel, taking the game category and putting it against the brain and how the brain works and providing interesting products to people, but the design and the feel of the store is very engaging, and the design element of how we think about games is different than people have before. I think that we're able to really leverage the community in Chicago with artists, people that are great with words to write do our copywriting, architects. We're able to bring all these talented individuals that maybe didn't have an avenue to make some money off of some of the things they were doing, and we have a puzzle from an artist design. We're going to bring in some more jigsaw puzzles from other artists in the Chicago area. The architects that we've worked with have been fantastic. We've just been able to bring all these design people into our group and have business people work with them to create something that is great for the customer in the end.
Thea, you were saying to me before when we were chatting that your experience as a Loeb Fellow at Harvard has actually made you rethink your earlier notions about business and this idea that the arts and business are completely divided, that they're almost antithetical in some ways. I'm about purity and creativity away from market forces. But you said your thinking's evolved. What do you mean?
Well, it was interesting that maybe at Harvard, where I thought most of what we would concentrate on would be these kind of hard lines about what it means to be an entrepreneur and how not to take risk and how to avoid it, and that what I found was a kind of reaffirmation that these things were about the heart, and that entrepreneurs were mission driven, that like all these things that I felt I had innately that I thought were evil, all this innate evil inside me, that maybe there's a way that I could be purposeful in the set of skills that I have and have those things in that mission benefit folk in a really intentional way. And so instead of concentrating on for-profit, some other part of town or something, that if there was a way that I could use those skills around real estate finance or planning, smart planning or smart growth, or my sheer love for like making money and playing with numbers and stuff, then maybe there's a way that as an artist that could be a benefit on the South Side and on the Black South Side, in a place where people were economically strapped and also in need of good ideas combined with some smart, innovative business practices. That I felt like I've been getting more and more encouragement, and some of it came from Harvard, to just kind of follow that purpose-driven business ethic. I should also say that I feel no less committed to having an art practice, that at heart, I know the needs of artists because I know my needs every day. And so I'm just trying to use the skill set to solve my problem, which in turn might, solve my neighbor's problems, and or that we could think about a problem bigger together. It's...
Jaime, I'm dying to get you in on this. So I was thinking about maybe starting with you, and then I thought maybe I'll start with Jeannie, and I was sort of going in my mind. I went with Fiesta, and here you are. You're the last man standing here.
He's the man,
there's more I want to say about business, but let's start by talking about Enlace, going back a few years ago, you're working mostly in the area of community and education and services and violence prevention, all these kinds of things. When and how does arts come into the whole worldview of Enlace?
Sure. So our new communities program is driven by a 5-year quality of life plan that was created by different stakeholders in the neighborhood, representing every sector, the business sector, young people, schools. And that plan consisted of 8 strategies, and one of those strategies called for increased opportunities and programs in the arts in Little Village. Because unlike Pilsen and other communities, there isn't really, at the time, wasn't an existing sort of organization that focused on the arts in our neighborhood, but we knew that there was a lot of talented people in the community. So, as an organizer at heart, we wanted to approach it from an organizing perspective. So it was about, well, let's see who's out there. How do we get to know the artists that are in the community, already doing great work, besides just offering hummus and cheese and wine at our meetings?
Right. So the arts is an organizing tool about not only, as you have told me previously, not only understanding who are the artists and what are the artistic assets in your community, but if you can actually leverage them and surface them, all the other people who might gather around them.
Exactly, exactly. And then they become an integral part of community development as people as well, right? Not just as producers of art. Yeah. And so actually a recommendation from our program officer from LISC was, well, why don't we offer up a small arts grant in the neighborhood to see who's doing what and see what kind of applications we get. So we did that in 2005. It resulted in more than 15 applications from individuals and groups, not necessarily established groups, just folks that had been doing drum making workshops in their home, or a couple of sisters that had been running dance classes, incorporating them to leadership development. A married couple who were both architects, wanting to increase the number of young Latinos entering the architectural field, right? These were the types of applications we got. We were like, this is awesome, right? And the grants were small. They were between $1,500 to $2,000. And then at the end of the summer, where after their programs had already been implemented, we said, well, let's show the community sort of the results of all this work that you guys did. And that turned into a much larger art fest with multiple sites. And sites that wouldn't necessarily be found at a typical community art fair. We don't have galleries, we don't have studios, so we had to use a cafe or an empty storefront or an empty office building, people's homes, right? These were the locations. The Astor participated as well in our first and second one. And then these artists, because we had already organized and said, well, we need to continue to do this, right? Whether we get small grants or not. This is really important what we did here. So they decided to form their own arts organization. It's called Villarte, and they've been conducting this art fest every year since then. It's entering its 6th year in the fall, doing it on their own. This year, we're actually able to have it together with an event called Open House Chicago, in collaboration with the Chicago Architectural Foundation, that's coming into neighborhoods to look at buildings that are architecturally significant, but not in traditional ways. But outside of that sort of movement that created this organization that is now sustaining itself within our organization, arts is a part of really any aspect of community development. In our after-school programs in education, we offer photography, we offer breakdancing, we offer things like guitar playing. Why? Well, because everyone knows that students' academic achievement increases if they are exposed to an art. Within our violence prevention work, obviously one of the factors that leads to young people participating in risky and violent behavior is a lack of recreational opportunities. And art is a big part of that, right? So whenever possible, we try to engage our young people from our violence prevention programs in the development of a mural, right? Or in the development of some sort of street theater, what have you. I think the point has clearly been made about the relationship between the arts and economic development. So it's just a natural part of what we do to develop communities. Because when you think about, when anyone thinks about the type of neighborhood they want to live in, whether you're black or white or Latino, everybody wants to live in a neighborhood where you can walk out of your door a few blocks and see some art, right? Not only that, but particularly in an ethnic community, it's also a big part of cultural preservation, right? I participated several years ago in the development of a mural, and an older gentleman who shall remain nameless saw it and said, oh, typical, you know, there's an Aztec calendar, there's Aztec pyramids and the serpent, and I'm like, yeah, they're typical to you and me, but they're not typical to a 5-year-old that's walking down the street with his mother or his father, right, who has not been exposed to those cultural iconic images that, if disappeared, would lose a lot, would not necessarily maybe be exposed to those images, and may not spark more interest in that child's learning about his culture or his environment or his or her neighborhood.
Yeah. Rocco and Shell, you've been sitting here quietly listening. What's your response to sort of what you're hearing here, and what's your reaction to the kinds of issues and challenges?
Well,
and
what's fascinating to me is there hasn't been any talk about the big cultural institutions, about those big temples on the hill that that are a little bit forbidding and formidable to go visit for most people in the communities. It's all about the role of art in the communities, and the role of the community in the art. It hasn't been, I mean, we're sitting in one of these temples now, but this is really about the intersection of art with neighborhoods and communities, and that is what,
the living out of everyday life.
Yes, and that's been pretty much our theme at the NEA and yours. It's about the places where people live.
No, but I'd like to respond to that too. I think that there's a way. Part of what I've been after is how can we reimagine what the big institutions are supposed to do, so that if the big institutions have they have the same burden that I do, that they need the audience and I need the culture. You know what I mean? That there's this, and are there ways that the institutions could think creatively about where theater happens, so that it's not just the Joffrey Ballet that happens downtown on the hill. Yeah, and so I think, and then how could if big institutions are the receptacles of certain kinds of resources, how could I leverage the big institutions' resources to do interesting things in other places? That there might be new resources generated as a result of these connections between the communities that are out in the valley and the museum on the hill. Because I found that museums and other kinds of cultural institutions, theaters, that there's a real hunger to figure out what are those audiences that we don't know.
And sometimes they just don't know exactly how to access or engage or where to go to begin.
And there's aspiration in it. I mean, you go to a museum and you see this beautiful artwork and you then might come up with an idea. You know, I think there's so much about going to cultural events in a big theater like this, or going to a museum and seeing beautiful artwork that has been around for hundreds and thousands of years or whatever, that brings inspiration to you into rethinking what we can create today. So I don't think anyone here would say it's not important to have a theater and have a place where people can come together, and it can be an aspiration. I want to be on that theater, and having communities to come to once they are moving around.
I think sometimes the role that is missing by big institutions is understanding the need for long-term investment and education, right? So I've been a part of a lot of events where we'll bring an international artist to Little Village High School or what have you, and there's a low turnout. And so the conclusion is, oh, Latinos don't care about art, Latinos don't care about theater, But that has a lot to do with levels of exposure and education to those disciplines, right? And I think that if large cultural institutions really want that participation of marginalized community, there needs to be, again, long-term investment and educational components to these engagement initiatives.
Yeah. Something else that we were talking about also before this conversation, Jaime, if I remember it correctly, you said one of the things that needs to be rethought, whether it's a large cultural institution, whether it's a government agency, whether it's a major philanthropic foundation, is not approaching individual neighborhoods or individual communities, I think as you put it, from the guise of a sociologist, that sometimes that plays out. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, oftentimes when folks come into the neighborhood that have some level of standing in the art community, it's more to sort of understand or be inspired or write about or you know, have a book signing, and those, you know, that's great. Those are steps of introduction, but you know, very similar to what I just said about cultural institutions, that there is a need to sort of try to become more a part of the community, and
with that kind of sustained investment you were talking about.
Yeah.
But let me spin this for just a moment, because Jeannie, you're operating internationally. We're talking so much about Chicago as a global city today, and there's no question that at the level of globalness, Chicago's major cultural institutions, from its amazing theaters to its world-class, you know, museums and so forth, are a big part of that reputation and attracting things. So how important are those kinds of things in attracting talent for you directly to work at Studio Gang, and in getting the attention of other prospective clients elsewhere?
That's a good question. It's really to building my practice here from one person, me starting out, to 40 people that we are now. You know, you need talented people to want to come and be there and work, and creative people. And what creative people want is a place to live that has all these variety and diverse venues for different kinds of arts. So it's about, a lot of times I'm trying to attract a student that might be coming from the East Coast to come live into Chicago and come work here and live here. So they're very important. These aspects of everyday life and how art is infused into everyday life is very important. And I think that what differentiates Chicago from New York, say, is that we have all these various arts, but the point of contact is closer. You can be involved and you can know artists, and you can, it's not so, I think almost in New York there's so much of everything, but it's also almost like the arts get relegated into different little cities of their own, and they're just awe-inspiring. But here you have all that diversity, but you also have a point to touch and to be part of it. So I think that's really attractive to people.
What is it that ultimately keeps you here as opposed to relocating to New York or to Berlin or some other part of the world?
Well, I mean, part of it is that today practicing, it doesn't, the actual location where you are doesn't matter as much in terms of doing the work. You know, we had a team with people from France, Belgium, China, like 5 different countries working on one project, where we just met via, you know, WebEx, so your actual physical location doesn't hurt you. And in fact, Chicago is very connected with air and transport, so it's convenient. So that part doesn't hurt you. And then what you're looking for is a way to be impactful in your local and venue, you know, in Chicago. That's why we always make sure to do some local projects as well as international ones.
Yeah.
So, Steve, this is actually right at the heart of the kind of nut that we're trying to crack at the national level, which is that in order for our country to succeed, we've really got to get back on the economic forefront, okay? And, you know, as Jeannie is saying, people are choosing where to locate their businesses in part by where they can attract the talent that will actually stay there. And in community after community that we've been in, the business leaders are all saying, I need that rich, interesting life in order to attract the talent. We were in Austin, Texas. That was hands down the #1 thing that all of those, you know, big high-tech folks said. And what that means to me is that we can't simply just ask the artists or the creative class to kind of take on this job of supporting corporate culture. That we have to recognize that they are as important to our success as attracting business from the outside world is. And part of what we've been trying to do as we talk to communities around the country is to bring in, for instance, the kind of economic development folks whose main mission generally is to attract new businesses to communities and help them understand that perhaps an equally important role for them as, public sector folks is to nurture and support the local entrepreneur and artist class, and that those are fundamental investments to be able to having a strong economy in their region.
One of the things we've learned from Richard Florida and others who have worked in this field is that people don't follow businesses, the businesses follow people. It's the field of dreams in reverse. If you come, they will build it. And it's fascinating to me. There was recently a Gallup poll commissioned by the Knight Foundation, which asked people what do they like about where they live. What is it about where they live that they like, and what is attracted to people? What attracts people to a place to live? And they haven't said jobs, education, the things that you would expect. What they've said are openness, social offerings, and aesthetics. And that's how they choose to find a place, how they choose a place to live, how they seek something out. And the businesses follow that, kind of educated, committed workforce. And the aesthetics, the quality of life, the fabric of the quality of life is something that attracts people to a place. And of course, the arts have a major role.
I think that, as an entrepreneur, I think Chicago, and this is not a national stage, but Chicago is so well positioned because the cost of living is not over the top. And there's so much talent here. There's great universities. There's so many people willing to help. The art community is great. I think that Chicago is so well positioned. It hasn't attracted the funding. So that's been the major challenge in Chicago is the venture funding and kind of the sector to finance these entrepreneurs isn't available yet. You have to go to the East and West Coast. Luckily with Marbles, it's all been funded here, and we'll be staying in Chicago and expanding from here, and it's a great place to do that. Centrally located, lots of talent, retail mecca in a lot of ways. So
well, just
it's going to happen more and more. I think you're just at the beginning.
Just a quick follow-up, though. I mean, because at the 10,000-foot level, when we think about business in many cities, Chicago included, we think about, okay, major corporations providing major support for Lyric Opera Chicago or something like that. And you're talking about, we've all been talking about different ways in which business can create a climate and can also benefit from artistic and cultural endeavors. So the VC piece seems to be key. Where else can and should the private sector think about playing here to create the kind of community that other businesses will want to actually come and set up shop in?
I mean, I think that there's a movement, I think, on that bringing entrepreneurs to Chicago. There's a program called Accelerate Labs that is out there for people to apply. 300 people in Chicago applied to get $15,000 for a summer to start a business. There are things like that that are getting developed. I think their communities has to grow, the networking has to continue, and the big corporations can help that by sponsoring events and getting to know the entrepreneurs in the community and drawing people here to start their businesses. I know OkCupid was a Chicago entrepreneur and moved to New York because that's where he needed to go to get his business off the ground. How could we have kept him here from the beginning? And I think he's coming back wanting to make that community a big community, and I think there's just a lot that bigger corporations can do by creating an environment where everyone gets to know each other.
Yeah, Steve, I just wanted to maybe talk a little bit about space. In relationship to placemaking and maybe the private sector, that there's a way in which resources are made available for through TIFs and that to attract businesses. But I think often the private sector thinks about itself in relationship to other private sector entities, that there's rarely a kind of ecology of creativity, that the same artists who have a wood shop down the street are the same artists that would work for your organization, that they also need a studio space in addition to your lab space or this end product that they're producing, that there could be ways of harnessing the private creative industries with artists, individual artists with art not-for-profits, and that we have an amazing housing stock and warehouse stock that's still yet underdeveloped. And that underdeveloped stock could be the right, large buildings, could be the right points of connection and nexus whereby private industries that are doing creative things could partner with individual artists, creative entrepreneurs, and not-for-profits to grow bigger cultural hubs in the city. And so when you guys talk about placemaking, it could be that like it's in the back of the yards and it used to be train and rail, and now it could be bike and pedway, that there has to be kind of an investment at a very big level of kind of private equity investment, city investment, and then like artists and arts organizations who are willing to like consider the private industry as potential partners in the creation of new spaces in the city.
I want to get to questions from the audience here because I don't want time to go waste, but really quickly, Shelley, on that point.
Yeah.
So how does the federal government plug into what Theaster's talking about there specifically? You know, is there something that the federal government under
There's a lot that
this
the federal
program
government
can help
do.
catalyze? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we know we don't have enough money to create this on our own.
Yeah.
It has to be in partnership with private sector. Philanthropy has been an enormous partner in this, but again, it has to become the way that we do things. And so, you know, what we can do is provide the seed money, the catalyst. You know, I mentioned the micro business lending. We have to make it really easy for communities to do this. Find the barriers and just remove them.
All right.
One thing is in schools too. Sorry
Yeah.
to jump in, but just the schools, like we're talking about people our age, let's talk about 12-year-olds that if private business gets in there and helps sponsor an entrepreneur conference or whatever in a young age, and we just keep growing it as they graduate high school.
All right, I'll come back to this, but I saw some hands up. We do have some microphones right down here, so if those of you who are closely positioned can come to a microphone and step up. Those of you that are in the upper rafters, I see a hand up there, so let me come to you next and get this woman here in the front here. Yes, are you there to ask a question, or are you just to adjust the mic? Ah, got it, sorry. Yes, with your hand up there.
What kind of recommendations or thoughts might you have around ways to really make that cross-sector work happen on a local and on a national level from a funding perspective?
Shelley? First of all, did everyone hear that because of the...
Good
want to make
acoustics
sure.
in here.
All right, we have good acoustics here. For the benefit of those who may be listening to recording, the specific essence of the question has to do with how do you actually improve a process and create a process whereby artists can get engaged very early on at the beginning of the planning process as opposed to brought in at late stages. So what's your answer to that?
The Sustainable Communities grants that we're giving are kind of designed with this in mind, in that we're asking for cross-sector participation, and the funding can go directly to reimbursing the cost of folks to actually participate. It's something that I think is absolutely essential, and often we don't recognize that, you know, those of us who have the benefit of a day job that allows them to do this kind of stuff, we can participate all we want, but, you know, folks who need support need to be able to be compensated to be able to be part of the real discussion, and that's a really valuable viewpoint.
Yeah, Rafa.
Tomorrow we're having a big celebration of the 25th anniversary here in Chicago of the Mayor's Institute of City Design, which is a coalition of the NEA, the American Architectural Association, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We gave our MICD program gave a grant in Madison, Wisconsin for the development of their Central Park to hire an artist to be a part of that design process from the beginning, not as an add-on later on. And all I would suggest is that as you plan your application for the Our Town grants, which we're making, or others, that you think big, that you think about ways that other federal agencies, as I asked Mitch Landrieu, other agencies can be brought into this. And let's think about the bigger tapestry that we can weave also with the private sector. And we will soon, I think, have some interesting things to say about a coalition with the big arts funding private foundations that can work right alongside us on this. And I think we really will have a multiplier effect if we think big and collaboratively on this.
Other questions? Yes, yes, sir, in the red sweater, I believe.
I'm Paul Klein. I have a question. How do we get the word out? I mean, you know, this is enlightening, this is empowering, it doesn't need government support to happen. This is something that fifth graders can go, you know, like, what if I? And, you know, the notion of thinking big. If this was the Conservative Party trying to stop it, we would all know about it. But, you know, how do we as progressives and creatives communicate globally that this is possible and that this country can dream this kind of dream?
Rocco, I mean, that seems to be right in your wheelhouse, my friend.
It's a great question. Obviously, one way is to communicate among yourselves, to organize, to really become a constituency. I think that's a critical element of it. I think we can do a better job on our part. As we are starting to form these relationships with the federal agencies, we need to form a kind of clearinghouse or website where people, arts organizations and artists and people can go and say, oh, I have a project that may interest the Department of Transportation that relates to the arts, and have a way to access that. I think that's a critically important thing as we're starting to talk about working together.
Maybe I could also, I feel like maybe this is a good time to be a little bit critical of art, my artist, that every once in a while I'll go to a city department and and it'll be the day of bids, and I'll see 12 contractors lined up because it's bid day, and they know that, you know, $300 million is at stake, and they show up with their bid contracts and they're ready to do damage. And I think that there's a way in which the resources are kind of around and about, and that because we have varying levels of professional standards and practices of art, and we all come to art in different ways, we don't always know how to access that. And I think half of it is maybe the NEA's problem or MacArthur's problem or a philanthropic organization's problem. The other half is my problem, that I think that artists, we owe it to ourselves to kind of imagine and ask questions about where's the money to help us you know, have more expansive art practice. What are the other resources besides the money? So that Creative Capital did an amazing job at launching like their resources and making their website accessible so that people could access it and think that they could be a part, and then created tiers whereby if you didn't get the money, you might get these other resources, but it's still on me to apply. And so I'm curious about then how, but there is this interface that needs to happen between me and the resources.
Well, this is a big issue. For some reason, I think we can all guess what those reasons are, artists don't think of themselves as a constituent group. Yeah. There are 5.7 million full-time arts-related jobs in this country. Imagine that power if there is a modicum of organization and constituency building in that group.
I also think what the woman in the balcony made me think about is the fact that I think arts organizations, and then Rocco, you mentioned, you know, the need for organizing, need to understand their limitations in terms of community development and community planning, right? That's not their expertise. There are other organizations that have that expertise. You know, we see the work we do in terms of working with artists as community members who also happen to be artists, right? They live in this neighborhood, and so that's their stake in the participation. And they're not paid, right? So this independent arts organization that was developed is completely volunteer run right now. Everybody's doing it on their own. And yeah, I think that's why there is a need for these types of partnerships between a variety of organizations.
Yeah. There's another hand up over in this area. Yes, sir. I think a microphone will come to you.
Yeah, my name is Joe Mulvey. I work for Habitat for Humanity International, managing corporate partnerships. My prior life, I was an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, did a little startup, so I have been an entrepreneur. My question is for Lindsay. I had kind of found in my own experience that venture capital, kind of as a model, is kind of broken in the world today. Mm-hmm. And I know personally that Chicago doesn't have a big VC community. Right. But what seems to be working, and I work with a lot of corporations and individual investors, is the kind of angel investor. And I wanted to ask you, because it seems to me art is a central strength of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And I attended a course a few years ago with Michael Porter at Harvard, where he talked about the importance of place. and creating an ecosystem like Silicon Valley for software, where I was. Seems like Chicago could be a center of place for economic development and art tied to community, as the gentleman from La Raza talked about. I work with LISC. I see the central part of art. I would just be interested, well, all the panel, but particularly yours, of how we could tap into those individual investors and tie them, and maybe make Chicago, kind of a leading center in the world around art and investment in community.
I think that's an excellent question, especially because our dream would be to sort of have an art center in the neighborhood, sort of like the one Hyde Park recently opened a few years ago. But we're about 3 to 5 individual rich investors away from that. Right? We don't.
All you need is one.
Right. All we need is one, really. But there's reasons why those sets of relationships exist in certain neighborhoods and not in others.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't have the answer, of course. If I did, I would have not been fundraising for 2 years. So I think that one way is that business plan is important, or at least an idea of how there's going to be profits made in the business. And I think that's not a typical conversation when you're being imaginative and creative. So maybe there's a discussion around partnerships with business people and an artist to create something fantastic, and then bring it to someone, an angel investor, and present that idea so that they can see it and see what the path is. My background is definitely more on the business side, and I work with a lot of art and design folks to create something that has a path, and I think a profitable path. And so I present it and continue to present it. It's a hard road. You have to be out there talking to folks all the time and selling your business, and that's maybe really easy for some and harder for others. But I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there are a lot of people that believe in art and care about it, and care about design, and care about great retail environments. So they walk into Marbles and they're like, wow, this is really intriguing. They get my card and I talk to them about what we're doing with the business, but it takes a lot of frogs. So it is a challenging environment, especially with the economic downturn, but I think it's coming back. We're planning to open 10 more stores this year on the East Coast, and that's because we found partners to help us grow the business. But it is a challenge for everyone. I wish I knew the answer on that.
I was just going to say that I think that Chicago as a city should think about this more holistically. And we have these communities where we're trying to improve quality of life, improve the housing stock, improve the neighborhoods. But we also have to look at it as something that will attract people to come to Chicago to actually visit these places and not just stay right in in the downtown. And think about the arts as a thing that is a draw for people to visit this place, international and national visitors.
Let me try and squeeze in 1 or 2 more questions. I see a hand. I'm going to go all the way up top, and then I'll sneak back down here. Yeah.
Liz Brown, Imagine Chicago. I'm curious about what you see, any of you, as the role of the arts in cultivating civic imagination in ordinary citizens.
So the question, once again, is the role of the arts in cultivating imagination, civic imagination in ordinary citizens.
Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah.
I had mentioned to Steve a while back that maybe if I had to declare a politic, that it would be a politic of staying. That there's a way in which the neighborhood that I live in has a bunch of normal people who may not be very interested in some of my friends and may not be interested in some of the conversations that I have, but we all like Dusties. And we all like to live, you know what I mean? Or I don't have an oven and my next door neighbor has an oven. And so I use it, and I give a little cash. That there's a way in which, we keep saying that there's the high culture stuff, but I also think that part of what's exciting that I hope that the NEA and others could get behind is that there are a lot of people who are doing things at the very, very local level. And that I think that the civic imagination and the kind of cultural engagement, it's already happening. It's just not amplified. And because it's happening at a very modest place, the cultural funders or those amplifiers just may not be connected to those communities. And so I think what we have to do is figure out a better way of kind of connecting these big ambitious organizations with some of the stuff that's happening.
But one quick thing on this, because you were telling me, it's not just about sort of civic imagination as it relates to, say, voting or something, in the civic life. You were saying in your neighborhood at first, people were sort of looking like, who's this dude? What's he doing? And why can't I get me some of that? And you basically, over time, started to figure out that as you made and built relationships, people started bringing other things, other assets to the table, whether it's physical work, ideas, contacts, friends, and you were doing the same, and all of a sudden you've got this sort of community that came out of.
Yeah, they're happy accidents, but one clear example of a record shop went out of business on the south side, Dr. Wax. I bought the albums. Decided, now I could have just had a private collection of albums, but I just decided to invite my neighbors over and let's listen to some jazz. Well, then you find out that your neighbors have some albums in the basement and they don't listen to them anymore, and they want to, and so now, we have a guy recording, his first album live at Dorchester, it's like, and that in a way, there things can well up. And this is, again, where the cultural activity, I think, that happens most authentically doesn't happen from a huge meeting of stakeholders, because I feel like the stakeholders are going to show up are going to be the developers who can make the money off the tax credit, and the picture moment for the politicians, and that maybe there's another set of stakeholders who should also be at that meeting. And when you say, I got a collection of dusty albums, y'all want to come over and have some grits on Sunday morning. I don't want to be cliche, but there's a way in which the local civic, which to me sounds like my neighbors, there's a way of being neighborly that is actually a political act and an economic act. It's a culturally bonding act.
We're increasingly interested in what we're calling the informal arts. If you take the notion of arts and expand it beyond what is the marketplace into exactly what you're talking about, discovering a cache of jazz records, or performing informally in your garage for a group of people doing it, a neighborhood band, then the arts community expands exponentially, and it's a big part of our lives.
I'm going to leave the conversation there because I know that we're running short on time. I know there are many, many other questions. There's a reception in the lobby. I would encourage all of you to engage our panelists one-on-one in doing so. I do want to thank everyone, including Jaime De Leon, Theaster Gates, Lindsay Gaskin, Jeannie Gang, Rocco Landesman, and Shelley Patricia. Please give them a warm round of applause. Thank you all very, very much.